In 1884, a unique book was published called Flatland. And apart from some very clever social commentary, the work gave a perspective of what it would be like to live in a two-dimensional reality, as opposed to the three-dimensional one that we share. One could go left and right, forward and back, but there was no such thing as up and down. Perspective was hence restricted. And if something from the third dimension was to come and visit this two-dimensional reality, the perception of that object would be confined to the properties enabled by the two-dimensional view. So a three-dimensional object moving up and down through the two-dimensional plane would be perceived by the inhabitants as this mysterious mutating two-dimensional line. I would like to use this abstract notion as a very loose metaphor with respect to cultural perception. What if those in the two-dimensional flatland had actually always been in the three-dimensional space, but their frame of reference was so limited by the tools of measurement they had, their experience so consistent with the two-dimensional world, their associated values so ingrained and stubborn as generations passed that they were simply unable to reconcile its presence, even though it was obviously there. They might have even established whole philosophies and institutions based on the appearance of their world, perhaps the Church of Squares, or linear economics, or the party line of politics. But as time went on and their tools and education grew, the consequences of their perceptual folly started to manifest, and the beliefs and institutions they had created started to draw confusion and disorder as a natural evolution. And they might have thought, how could the very fabric of our assumptions that we all share of this reality that seem correct and almost provable over long periods of time, how could they actually be wrong? Around 200 BC, a Greek mathematician named Eratosthenes estimated the circumference of the planet Earth, likely the first mathematically to solidify that it was truly round and not flat. A rather dramatic finding since, well, it certainly looks flat, doesn't it? In Psalm 93 of the Bible, it states that the world is firmly established, it cannot be moved. And in another passage, it states the sun rises and the sun sets and then hurries to rise again. Well, that would make sense too, wouldn't it? After all, when you look at the sky, it appears to be moving around us. In fact, we still use that premise of thought in our language. We still say up and down when it's really out and in. We even still say sunrise and sunset, interestingly enough. It wasn't until Galileo really introduced our now obvious heliocentric universe, solar system, and it was confirmed, obviously amongst much traditional controversy, I might add. And since we're on the subject of the stars, to continue this type of example as I inch into value systems that perhaps might be shared in the common community, one of the most persistent pastimes of human indulgence since the beginning of recorded history, a practice that has generated a flourishing economic industry to this day, spreading across virtually all cultures, is the practice of astrology. In Western astrology, the signs of the zodiac, depending on their positions in certain time, at a certain time, are thought to have predictive power in some interpretive form, horoscopes, etc. In fact, astrology is so popular today across the world that you can't really read a newspaper without finding a column on it. I even tend myself to be asked what my sign is a few times a month when I engage different conferences. It's very, very common. But what is the basic perceptual source of this belief, especially in Western tradition? Well, it might as well be straight out of the book Flatland. First of all, the view of all constellations are seen as two-dimensional, yet the luminance of those celestial bodies that make up those forms are actually distributed across vast distances in three-dimensional space. Constellations, as we know them, simply do not exist outside of the prima facie pictures we see in the night sky. Second, stars are not fixed, as we came to understand. They are born and they die like us. It is the illusion of permanence given our very, very short duration on this planet in regards to human evolution and cosmic time that we think these 2D pictures will be the same for eternity, holding hence empirical value. Third, to reintegrate the 2D flaw, if you will, it's only a fixed perception from the planet Earth. If we were viewing these same stars from another side of the Milky Way galaxy from a different angle, they would not represent anything close to the forms we see from here. So despite the popular culture's interest, which is actually quite romantic, I have to admit, given the deep yearning to understand our place in relationship to the universe, relationship, by the way, which is the most common definition of spirituality. We are only left, however, to realize that in what I will call the expanded dimensional reality, debunking the limited dimensional perception, no different than the surface thinking that the world was flat or the sun moved around the earth, but yet most today won't argue those facts as adamantly as they will argue their belief in astrology. Another example of this limited dimensional perception comes from the cultural characteristics of the period of origin of certain ideas. Just as the constellations still today are recognized for their names after spoons and ox carts and scales and common animals, as opposed to space shuttles and TVs and laptops and smartphones, the projections of thought of any point in time can only reflect the state of knowledge at that point in time. It's a dead giveaway. The traditional religious systems of belief, for example, contain the rhetoric not of an advanced technological society or a society of advancements in, say, civil rights or advanced medical treatments. No, it contains the period-based cultural values that occurred thousands of years in the past. Did God invent man or did man invent God? Do the depictions of monotheistic gods appear like us? Why do they? Why do they appear like us? Why do they have tempers like man? Why are they emotional and judgmental and volatile and retributive? Why is it that monotheism is common to desolate desert cultures, while polytheism is common to lush, diverse rainforest cultures? Is it random chance that nearly all the early gods of Greece and Egypt actually related to natural phenomenon? The sun, the moon, the stars, the ocean, water. It's almost as though the minds of those who created these stories and ideas were trying to figure out what the natural world was and what it was doing, and they could only impose their culturally specific ideas upon them as the organism of knowledge continued its evolution. Why are the gods in traditional African religions black and the gods of the West white? Why are the gods of patriarchal societies always male? And why is it that people born into cultures that support these beliefs tend to perpetuate them? How often do you hear of an Arab person born in a Muslim culture magically becoming Jewish as a child? I'm sorry to stand in what could be a controversial opposition to the beliefs of what are really billions of people that ascribe to, say, astrology or theistic religious belief. But when the perceptual context of origin of these belief systems are taken into account, we find a clear, limited dimensional perception, cloaked as relevant through traditional perpetuation, denying the emergent nature of our reality. And this leads me to the true focus of this talk, believe it or not,